Picture this: a bustling city, alive with the sounds of daily life, suddenly silenced in an instant. Streets once filled with merchants and children playing, homes where families gathered, temples echoing with prayers, all frozen in time beneath a thick blanket of ash. This isn't the plot of a fantasy novel or some far-off legend. It's the real, haunting story of a civilization that vanished inside a volcano, leaving behind an entire world perfectly preserved, as if time itself stood still. For centuries, this mysterious disappearance has puzzled historians, archaeologists, and adventurers alike. How could an entire society be so abruptly erased, yet leave behind such an immaculate record of their existence? The answers lie buried beneath layers of history, waiting to be uncovered. What makes this story so extraordinary isn't just the scale of the disaster, it's the eerie perfection of what was left behind. Unlike other ancient ruins worn down by time and weather, this civilization's homes, artifacts, and even personal belongings remain startlingly intact. A loaf of bread half-eaten on a table, jewelry carefully laid out as if its owner would return any moment, the footprints of those who fled, forever etched into the ground. These aren't just relics, they're snapshots of real lives, interrupted in an instant. It's as if the volcano didn't just bury this city, it sealed it in a time capsule, preserving every detail for future generations to discover. So what happened to these people? How did their world end so abruptly? And what can their untouched remains tell us about who they were? The truth is more fascinating and heartbreaking than you might expect. This isn't just a tale of destruction. It's a window into an ancient way of life, a chance to walk the streets of a lost world and piece together the stories of those who called it home. From the grandeur of their temples to the intimacy of their kitchens, every artifact whispers secrets about their culture, their beliefs, and the final moments they shared. So join me as we step into the shadow of the volcano, unraveling the mysteries of a civilization that disappeared, but refused to be forgotten. The story of this lost civilization might have remained hidden forever if not for a stroke of luck and a farmer's plow. In the late 18th century, workers digging near the base of the volcano struck something unexpected: a wall made of finely cut stone, buried beneath centuries of earth. Word spread quickly, drawing curious explorers to the site, but it wasn't until the mid-19th century that proper excavations began. What they uncovered defied belief. Layer by layer, archaeologists peeled back the volcanic ash like the pages of a history book, revealing streets, buildings, and everyday objects untouched by time. The excavation techniques had to be painstakingly careful. This wasn't just another ruined city. The ash had acted like a natural preservative, sealing homes, marketplaces, and even delicate frescoes in near-perfect condition. Workers used brushes instead of shovels, gently sweeping away dust to uncover fragile artifacts. A pottery workshop stood exactly as its last potter left it, with half-finished vases still waiting to be fired. In one home, a meal sat abandoned on the table, its carbonized remains telling a silent story of a family interrupted. Perhaps most haunting were the hollow spaces in the hardened ash cavities left by decomposed organic material. Archaeologists filled these voids with plaster, revealing the shapes of fallen victims, their final moments preserved in eerie detail. A child curled beside a parent, a man shielding his face. These casts became some of the most powerful evidence of the disaster's suddenness, freezing not just a city, but human lives in mid-action. The discoveries kept coming: intricate mosaics, towering statues of gods, even graffiti scrawled on walls by ordinary people. Each find added another piece to the puzzle, showing a vibrant culture with advanced engineering, bustling trade, and deep spiritual traditions. But the greatest revelation was how ordinary life had been until it wasn't. This wasn't just a city destroyed, it was a civilization captured in its prime, offering an unparalleled window into the ancient world. The volcano's fury had stolen lives but gifted history an almost miraculous record of how they lived. The volcano responsible for this civilization's sudden disappearance wasn't just any mountain. It was a sleeping giant that had shown signs of unrest for years before its catastrophic awakening. Geological records reveal a pattern of smaller tremors and steam vents in the decades leading up to the eruption, warnings that likely went unheeded or misunderstood by the people living in its shadow. When the final explosion came, it wasn't a slow oozing of lava but an apocalyptic blast that changed the landscape in mere hours. Scientists now classify this eruption as a Plinian event, a type of volcanic explosion so violent it can shoot ash columns over 20 miles high. The initial blast would have been heard hundreds of miles away, followed by a rain of pumice stones the size of walnuts pelting rooftops. But the real killer came next: pyroclastic surges, superheated waves of gas and volcanic matter traveling at over 100 miles per hour. These deadly currents didn't just bury the city, they entombed it. With temperatures so extreme they carbonized organic material on contact while simultaneously creating that perfect preservation effect. Accounts from survivors in neighboring towns describe a nightmare scenario. One written record speaks of a black cloud rolling down the mountainside, like a flood of darkness, swallowing everything in its path. Another mentions how birds fell dead from the sky mid-flight, overcome by toxic gases. The ashfall was so thick that daylight vanished completely, creating an artificial night that lasted for days. Those close enough to see the eruption reported fiery fountains of molten rock arcing through the smoke, a spectacle of destruction both terrifying and mesmerizing. Modern volcanologists studying the ash layers can pinpoint exactly how events unfolded. The first 12 hours brought heavy pumice fall, giving residents enough time to panic but not enough to escape. Then came the game-changing pyroclastic flows, multiple waves of them, each depositing another layer of fine ash that packed tightly around buildings, filling every crevice. This rapid, sequential burial is why we find wooden objects carbonized but intact, why frescoes retain their vibrant colors, and why even delicate items like woven baskets survived. The volcano didn't just kill a civilization, it mummified an entire way of life. What's particularly chilling is how ordinary the day must have started. Archaeologists found sundials frozen at mid-morning, market stalls set up for the day's business, and tools dropped mid-use. The eruption didn't discriminate, it caught rich and poor, young and old, in the middle of their daily routines. A gold bracelet engraved with a lover's name sits near the skeleton of a wealthy woman, while a slave's shackles were found still clamped around ankle bones. The volcano preserved not just buildings but social hierarchies, family bonds, and personal stories, a cross-section of an entire society suspended in its final moments. The mountain's violence created a paradox. The same forces that obliterated life also granted immortality. Without that catastrophic eruption, we'd know far less about this culture's architecture, their meals, their artistry. The ash acted like a global pause button, stopping clocks but gifting future generations an unprecedented look into antiquity. As one researcher put it, this wasn't just destruction, it was the world's most accidental time capsule. The very event that erased this civilization from the present ensured it would never fade from history. Walking through the ash-preserved streets today is like stepping into a photograph, one where time stopped mid-breath. The city wasn't some abandoned ruin when disaster struck. It was pulsing with life. Take the marketplace, where excavators found scales still balanced with weights, as if the merchant had just turned away for a moment. Nearby, a basket of figs sat shriveled but recognizable, their once juicy flesh carbonized into fragile black shells. Even the price tag survived, scratched into clay tablets beside stacks of grain, revealing an economy where a loaf of bread cost 2 copper coins and a fine wool cloak might set you back 30. Homes tell equally intimate stories. In one kitchen, a clay pot still held the remnants of a fish stew, garlic cloves, and olive pits floating in a layer of hardened ash. Archaeologists analyzing the residue identified ingredients like fermented fish sauce and imported spices, proving this wasn't just sustenance, it was cuisine. Upstairs, a child's wooden toy horse lay toppled beside a set of knucklebones, the ancient equivalent of dice. These weren't museum pieces, they were objects mid-use, abandoned in the scramble to survive. The city's artistry was just as vibrant. A fresco workshop stood frozen in creative chaos, with pigment still smeared on mixing slabs and half-finished murals sketched onto walls. One partially colored scene showed a baker pulling bread from an oven, a snapshot of a profession so ordinary it might never have been recorded otherwise. Nearby, a jeweler's workbench held a delicate gold chain with one broken link, perhaps the craftsman's frustration when the ground first trembled beneath him. Social hierarchies emerged from the ruins with startling clarity. Wealthy villas boasted intricate mosaic floors depicting mythological scenes, their walls lined with bronze oil lamps. Just blocks away, cramped apartments housed multiple families, their belongings limited to simple pottery and straw bedding. Yet even here, personal touches survived: a seashell necklace tucked under a pillow, a love note scratched into plaster. The volcano preserved not just a city, but its humanity, the universal quirks of people who laughed, bartered, and dreamed like we do. Perhaps most poignant are the glimpses of rituals interrupted. In a temple courtyard, priests had laid out offerings of wine and fruit for an upcoming festival. The ceremonial bowls still sat in perfect rows, their contents reduced to shadows in the ash. Nearby, someone had etched a prayer into a column, a plea for good fortune that would go unanswered. These fragments form a mosaic of faith and routine, a culture unaware it was living its final chapter. The true miracle lies in the mundane: a loaf of bread stamped with its baker's mark, a set of keys left dangling by a door, a doctor's kit with scalpels and herbal remedies, suggesting a society advanced enough to prioritize healing. Each artifact whispers the same truth: these weren't just victims of a disaster. They were people who woke up that morning expecting another ordinary day, making breakfast, arguing with neighbors, chasing children through sunlit streets until the sky turned black and their world ended. Yet in that ending, they gave us an impossible gift: the chance to meet them. Crossing the threshold of these ancient homes feels like intruding on someone's private moment, a sensation both humbling and haunting. The front doors, often left ajar in the rush to escape, open onto rooms where everyday life was suddenly cut short. Beds still bear the impressions of those who slept there, their woven straw mattresses indented as if the occupants had just risen minutes before. On a wooden dresser, a collection of carved bone hairpins and glass perfume bottles sits undisturbed, arranged by hands that never returned to use them. Even the soot from oil lamps lingers on the ceilings, marking where light once flickered against frescoed walls. The architecture itself reveals a society that valued both beauty and practicality. Wealthier homes boasted atriums with shallow pools to collect rainwater, their floors inlaid with intricate geometric mosaics. modest apartments stacked tightly along narrow alleys, maximized space with lofted sleeping areas and fold-down tables. Every residence, regardless of size, shared one striking feature: an almost obsessive attention to detail. Cabinet doors swung smoothly on bronze hinges, terracotta pipes fed water to indoor fountains, and windows were strategically placed to catch the afternoon breeze. These weren't just shelters, they were carefully crafted extensions of the lives within. Nowhere is this intimacy more palpable than in the kitchens. At one hearth, a bronze pot still cradles the burnt remains of lentil stew, its ladle resting against the rim where someone dropped it. Nearby, a wooden shelf holds stacks of dishes, fine ware for guests, chipped bowls for daily use. Archaeologists found one home with a week's worth of meals preserved in their pots: fish bones in a broth, carbonized bread, even a honey cake hardened into a dark, sugary lump. These aren't just artifacts, they're grocery lists and recipes, telling us what a family considered comfort food 2,000 years ago. The footprints pressed into volcanic ash add a layer of visceral immediacy. In one hallway, a child's small prints race toward an outer door, likely following a parent. Another set, bare and broad, strides across a courtyard with purposeful steps, perhaps someone sprinting with a precious bundle. Most heartbreaking are the clustered prints found near sewer grates, where groups huddled together as toxic gases seeped in, their final moments marked by shifting weight and desperate embraces. Personal belongings scattered throughout these rooms feel like stolen glances into private lives. A wax tablet lies open, its scribbled grocery list still legible: olives, cheese, and a measure of wine. Under a bed, a dog's collar with a bell suggests a pet that barked at the first tremors. In a teenager's room, a wall is etched with tallies, maybe debts owed or games won, and the scratched name of a sweetheart. These ordinary fragments collectively whisper an extraordinary truth: that history isn't just about empires and wars, but about people who fretted over dinner, lost hairpins, and doodled when bored. The most revealing spaces are often the least grand. A servant's quarters behind a lavish villa held a hidden treasure: a clay figurine of a mother goddess tucked beneath a thin mattress. In a fisherman's cottage, nets hung neatly on pegs while shells lined the windowsill, souvenirs from beach walks. Even in crisis, there are signs of compassion: an elderly man's bones found cradling a younger woman's, or a staircase where someone paused to grab a neighbor's infant before fleeing. The volcano preserved not just objects but choices, priorities, and flashes of bravery in the face of oblivion. Standing in these rooms today, it's impossible not to wonder about the last moments here. Did the family who owned that half-mended tunic argue over breakfast? Was the person who polished that silver mirror admiring their reflection when the ground shook? The ash captured more than structures, it fossilized humanity itself, the messy, tender, utterly ordinary beauty of lives interrupted. One of the most baffling aspects of this buried city isn't what was preserved but what's conspicuously missing. Compared to Pompeii, where plaster casts of victims became iconic symbols of the disaster, here the streets and homes remain eerily empty of human remains. Archaeologists expected to find hundreds, perhaps thousands of bodies frozen in ash. Instead, they uncovered only scattered bones, leaving a haunting question: where did everyone go? The first theory suggests a mass exodus. Geological evidence shows the volcano gave warnings: small earthquakes, gas emissions, for days before the catastrophic eruption. Unlike Pompeii's single devastating blast, this disaster may have offered a crucial window for escape. Records from neighboring towns describe refugee caravans arriving in the days following the eruption, supporting the idea that many fled successfully. Excavations along likely escape routes have turned up personal items dropped in haste: a sandal here, a bundle of coins there, as if people lightened their loads while running. But if most survived, why didn't they return? Historians point to continuous seismic activity and poisonous gases that would have made the region uninhabitable for generations, scattering survivors across distant cities where they blended into new populations. Yet another possibility is far grimmer. Volcanologists studying the pyroclastic flows note temperatures exceeding 900 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to instantly cremate organic matter. Unlike Pompeii's slower ash fall that encased bodies, these superheated surges may have vaporized flesh and bone, leaving only ghostly impressions in the ash where people once lay. In one chilling find, archaeologists discovered a stone staircase with strange, glassy patches on the steps. Laboratory analysis revealed these were human remains, not bones, but the mineralized residue of vaporized tissue fused with volcanic material by extreme heat. A third theory combines both scenarios. The eruption likely occurred in multiple phases. Initial tremors drove some to flee, while subsequent explosions caught stragglers in progressively more lethal conditions. Some victims may have been buried under collapsing buildings before the pyroclastic flows arrived, their skeletons protected from complete disintegration. This would explain why the few remains found are often clustered in specific areas, cellars where people took shelter, or along certain streets where escape routes bottleneck. Forensic archaeologists have turned to chemistry for answers. Soil analysis reveals startling spikes in phosphorus levels, an element abundant in human tissue across entire neighborhoods, suggesting widespread bodily decomposition despite the absence of bones. In some homes, metal objects like door hinges show unusual corrosion patterns consistent with exposure to intense heat and human-derived acids. These chemical ghosts imply that victims were indeed present when disaster struck, but the volcano's unique fury left almost no physical trace. Perhaps the most poignant clue comes from the city's harbor. Marine archaeologists discovered dozens of boats sunk just offshore, some still loaded with household goods. Were these failed escape attempts or vessels swamped by the eruption's tidal effects? One ship's cargo included hundreds of wax tablets, legal documents, and personal letters carefully packed as if someone hoped to preserve their life's paperwork. The ink has faded, but the intention remains clear. These were people planning for a future that never came. The missing bodies create an unsettling paradox. Their absence makes the site feel less like a tomb and more like a stage set waiting for actors to return. But in that void, we find something equally powerful, not just how these people died, but how they lived until the very last moment. Whether they fled or vanished into the ash, their story lingers in the empty chairs, the abandoned meals, the half-packed bags. The volcano may have taken their remains, but it couldn't erase their humanity. Among the countless treasures pulled from the ash, a simple wooden comb tells a story as eloquent as any temple inscription. Its teeth, still clogged with strands of hair 2,000 years later, speak of morning routines interrupted. Nearby, a bronze mirror retains its reflective sheen, its handle shaped like a goddess, proof that vanity and devotion often shared the same shelf. These aren't just artifacts, they're intimate conversations with the past, each object whispering secrets about the hands that held them. The craftsmanship reveals a society at the height of its artistry. Goldsmiths worked with precision so fine that necklace chains could pass through the eye of a needle, their designs blending local motifs with influences from distant trade partners. One workshop yielded unfinished pieces, a half-soldered bracelet, gemstones waiting to be set as if the artisans expected to return after lunch. Even practical items carried flair, farming hoes with handles carved to resemble serpents, ceramic oil lamps painted with scenes from Bawdy Tavern songs. Everywhere, utility and beauty intertwined. Religion permeated daily life through small, personal idols found tucked into walls or worn as pendants. A clay figurine of a fertility goddess, her paint still vivid, was discovered beside a child's bed, likely a protective charm. In contrast, temple artifacts show grand ceremonial splendor. A silver libation bowl inscribed with prayers for abundant harvests, its rim worn smooth by countless fingertips. The most haunting ritual object, a collection of lead-cursed tablets, their twisted forms and scrambled letters intended to bind enemies through dark magic. Trade networks stretched astonishingly far. Amphorae stamped with merchants' marks held Spanish olive oil, Egyptian glass beads glittered in jewelers' stalls, and a single peppercorn from India rested in a chef's discarded mortar. The marketplace's weights carved from local stone but standardized to Mediterranean measures prove this was no isolated outpost but a hub where continents converged. Even the humble revealed global connections. Fish sauce fermenting in jars bore chemical signatures matching recipes from North Africa. Domestic tools sketch scenes of bustling households. A carbonized loaf of bread, its baker's stamp still visible, shares a shelf with cheese strainers still clogged with dairy residues. In one cellar, archaeologists found a stack of lead pipes and a wrench, evidence of sophisticated plumbing repairs in progress. Children's toys, from terracotta dolls to knucklebones used in games, lay scattered where they fell, while a set of iron surgical instruments in a doctor's home included scalpels nearly identical to modern designs. Perhaps most moving are the objects that defy time's erosion. A wax tablet preserves a student's clumsy handwriting as he practiced alphabet drills. A garden's outline remains visible in the ash, its soil still holding the shapes of rosemary and thyme roots. Then there's the ring, a gold band with an emerald found clutched in a skeleton's fingers. When conservators cleaned it, they discovered an inscription inside the band: "Forever in my thoughts." These aren't museum pieces, they're heartbeats frozen in metal, clay, and carbon, bridging the centuries with their unbearable humanity. The true genius of these artifacts lies in their contradictions. A culture capable of crafting delicate glass perfume bottles also produced brutal gladiator armor. Homes with heated floors and intricate mosaics stood beside workshops where slaves forged chains. This was no utopia frozen in ash, but a real, flawed, vibrant society, one where people prayed over meals they'd spiced with imports from across the known world, where children played while artisans debated the day's wages, where lovers exchanged rings even as a mountain smoldered unseen. Every recovered object is a thread in a tapestry we're only beginning to unravel. Among the ash-preserved ruins, one discovery stands out as both tantalizing and frustrating: the written words of this lost civilization. Scratched into clay tablets painted on walls, even hastily etched into pottery shards, their script appears everywhere, from temple records to tavern graffiti. Unlike the Rosetta Stone that cracked Egyptian hieroglyphs wide open, these writings remain stubbornly enigmatic, their meaning just beyond our grasp. Linguists describe the script as a beautiful puzzle, flowing curves and angular symbols arranged in neat rows, sometimes accompanied by numerical notations that hint at sophisticated record-keeping. Early attempts to decipher it followed familiar paths, comparing symbols to known languages, searching for bilingual inscriptions, even using computational algorithms to detect grammatical patterns. But this language refuses to fit neatly into any existing linguistic family, leaving researchers to wonder, were these people speaking an isolated tongue, or does the key lie buried in some undiscovered archive? The challenge isn't just the script's uniqueness, it's the scarcity of lengthy texts. Most inscriptions are frustratingly brief, ownership marks on jars, single-line dedicatory plaques, or fragmentary legal contracts. One exception emerged from a banker's ruined villa, a cache of wax tablets filled with columns of symbols, their wooden frames charred but intact. Infrared imaging revealed previously invisible strokes beneath the soot, exposing what might be loan records or trade ledgers. Another breakthrough came from a temple's foundation stone, where a 4-line inscription appears to commemorate its construction. Linguists have tentatively identified repeating symbol clusters that might mean king or god, while numerals alongside commodity lists suggest tax records or inventory counts. What makes these fragments so compelling are the glimpses of personality bleeding through the unknowns. A wall near the marketplace bears a crudely carved caricature of a man with a long nose, accompanied by symbols that might be a joke or insult. In a quiet alley, someone scratched what appears to be a lover's plea beside a heart-shaped doodle. Even the formal inscriptions carry quirks. One ceremonial plaque shows meticulously carved symbols at the top, then descends into increasingly haphazard lettering, as if the stonecutter grew bored or was racing against time. These human touches remind us that writing wasn't just for elites. It was part of daily life, used for everything from sacred hymns to shopping lists. Recent technological leaps are opening new avenues for understanding. Multispectral imaging has recovered faded ink on pottery shards, revealing previously invisible marginal notes. Artificial intelligence models trained on known ancient languages look for hidden syntactic structures, while 3D scanning captures minute tool marks that might distinguish individual scribes. One promising approach studies the script's evolution, comparing early angular forms found in the city's oldest quarter to the more fluid later styles, much as Latin script developed from Roman capitals to modern cursive. Another team focuses on the script's possible logographic elements, symbols representing whole words or concepts, like Chinese characters or Egyptian hieroglyphs. Perhaps the most poignant discovery isn't a grand proclamation, but a child's writing exercise. A clay tablet bears rows of painstakingly copied symbols, the first shaky, then growing steadier under what was surely a teacher's guidance. At the bottom, a single perfectly formed character stands alone, perhaps the student's proud final attempt. In that moment, across 2 millennia, we don't need translation to recognize universal human experiences: the struggle to learn, the pride of mastery, the quiet bond between teacher and pupil. Until the day we fully decipher their words, these silent witnesses remind us that every stroke of their script was made by hands like ours, recording thoughts and dreams as vivid then as ours are now. The marketplace of this vanished civilization was a sensory overload of global flavors and textures, a testament to how deeply connected they were to distant lands. Excavations unearthed amphorae stamped with Greek merchant marks, still caked with the resin that once preserved Spanish olives. Tiny glass vials held traces of frankincense from southern Arabia, its perfume lingering after 2 millennia. Most telling of all, a single peppercorn perfectly preserved in a merchant's stall, a spice so rare and valuable it traveled over 4,000 miles from the Malabar coast of India. These weren't occasional luxuries, they were everyday goods, evidence of trade routes humming with activity long before the volcano's fury silenced them. Marine archaeologists mapping the harbor floor found the smoking gun, shipwrecks laden with cargo from every corner of the ancient world. One vessel carried Egyptian papyrus rolls alongside Phoenician purple dye, its hull patched with wood from Anatolian oaks. Another held Georgian copper ingots stacked beside Baltic amber beads, raw materials transformed into the jewelry and tools found in the city's workshops. The real revelation came from lead ingots stamped with the civilization's own symbols, discovered as far away as Sardinia and Carthage. these weren't just importers, they were exporters, their metalwork and textiles prized across the Mediterranean. The trade networks functioned with surprising sophistication. Standardized weights carved from local volcanic stone matched measurements used in Mesopotamia, suggesting a shared system for fair exchange. Clay tablets record transactions in cypress wood, Cypriot wine, and even exotic animals. One fragmented receipt mentions a pair of Nubian monkeys delivered to a wealthy patron's villa. Archaeologists found the villa's courtyard adorned with frescoes of those very creatures, their mischievous faces peering from the plaster. Goods moved along routes guarded by both diplomacy and force. A cache of letters etched onto bronze sheets reveals tense negotiations with pirate clans patrolling the Lycian coast, while a ceremonial dagger gifted to a local ruler bears inscriptions in 3 languages, a peace offering from a rival port city. The civilization's strategic location made it a linchpin. Their harbor sat at the crossroads of north-south amber routes and east-west spice trails, a geographic sweet spot that filled their coffers with tariffs and their markets with rarities. But trade wasn't just about wealth, it shaped their identity. A potter's workshop yielded plates blending Celtic spiral motifs with Egyptian lotus designs, creations meant for customers who valued cosmopolitan flair. Even their gods reflected this fusion. Statues of a local harvest deity wore Phoenician glass beads, while temple murals depicted sailors making offerings to foreign sea spirits alongside homegrown gods. The volcano didn't just bury a city, it entombed a microcosm of the ancient globalized world, where a merchant could taste Indian pepper at breakfast, don a Gallic wool cloak at noon, and sip Cretan wine by sunset. The abrupt end of this commercial hub sent ripples across the ancient economy. Within decades, certain goods disappeared from distant markets. A particular type of woven linen, a distinctive violet dye, the lead ingots with that mysterious script. Trading partners adapted, rerouting their ships to other ports, but something irreplaceable had vanished. Not just a middleman, but a cultural blender where ideas and artistry flowed as freely as goods. The ash preserved more than buildings. It captured a snapshot of globalization in Bronze Age form, proving that even 2,000 years ago, no civilization thrived in isolation. The temples and shrines scattered throughout the buried city tell a story of reverence and fear, a spiritual dance with forces far greater than humankind. Unlike the grand state religions of Rome or Egypt, this civilization's sacred spaces feel intensely personal, woven into the fabric of daily life. A household shrine might occupy a simple niche in a kitchen wall, its clay figurines blackened by centuries of oil lamp smoke, while just steps away, a communal altar stands piled with offerings, figs, seashells, and tiny bronze hands clasped in prayer. But the most revealing sights sit closest to the volcano's slopes, where processional roads lead to open-air sanctuaries built directly into the mountain's rocky flanks. These high-altitude shrines held artifacts that blurred the line between worship and warning. Archaeologists unearthed unusual clay tablets depicting the volcano in dual aspects, one side showing a fertile slope dotted with vineyards, the other spewing fiery plumes. Charred animal bones found in stone-lined pits suggest ritual feasts or sacrifices, their placement always facing the summit. Most haunting is a cavern discovered near the tree line, its walls covered in handprints made with red ochre, some adult, some startlingly small, pressed into the rock as if sealing a pact with the mountain itself. Were these gestures of devotion or attempts to placate a sleeping giant? The sacred objects left behind reflect a cosmology where nature and divinity intertwined. Bronze amulets shaped like vines and lightning bolts hung around worshippers' necks, while ceramic vessels bore painted scenes of gods emerging from fissures in the earth. One particularly striking fresco from a priest's quarters shows a deity with one half of its body composed of flowing water, the other of molten rock, a perfect metaphor for a land where hot springs and geysers dotted the landscape long before the catastrophe. Even their calendar systems hint at volcanic awareness. Clay discs marked with seasonal festivals include recurring symbols that align with periods of recorded seismic activity. Evidence of human sacrifice remains hotly debated. A stone platform near the volcano's base holds dark stains that preliminary tests identified as iron-rich, possibly blood, but whether from animals or people remains unclear. Nearby, a pit contained 7 skeletons arranged in a circle, their hands bound with silver wire. Some scholars argue these were criminals or prisoners of war, given their lack of grave goods, while others point to the careful positioning and precious bindings as signs of ritual significance. The truth may lie somewhere in between, a culture that saw the mountain as both giver and taker of life, capable of demanding the ultimate offering in times of crisis. What emerges is a religion deeply attuned to the land's volatility. Farmers left offerings of first fruits at steaming fumaroles, believing the earth's heat blessed their harvests. Smiths invoked volcano gods when forging metals. Their workshops often built atop thermal vents to harness natural heat. Even their death rituals reflected this relationship. Tombs faced away from the mountain, as if protecting souls from its unpredictable wrath. The volcano wasn't just a backdrop to their spirituality. It was an active participant, a living entity to be honored, feared, and perhaps in the end fled from. The final religious artifacts tell the most poignant story. In the temple's inner sanctum, priests had laid out ceremonial robes and sacred vessels in precise order, as if preparing for a rite that never occurred. A bronze censer still held charred remnants of last incense burned, its scent long faded but its purpose clear, one final attempt to commune with forces beyond human control. Outside, processional banners lay trampled in the ash, their embroidered pleas for protection now just threads in the wind. The volcano may have ended this civilization, but their faith, fragile, fierce, and irrevocably tied to the land, remains frozen in time, a testament to humanity's eternal struggle to find meaning in nature's fury. The charred remains of a meal left on a table tell us more than just what they ate. They reveal an entire culinary culture frozen in its final moments. In one kitchen, a clay pot still cradles the carbonized crust of a fish stew, its ingredients perfectly preserved by the volcano's ash. Analysis shows it contained garlic, olive oil, and a splash of fermented fish sauce, a staple condiment that tied their cuisine to distant Mediterranean trade routes. Nearby, a stone mortar holds the ghost of a crushed herb mixture, likely oregano or thyme, its scent long gone but its use unmistakable. These aren't just remnants, they're recipes waiting to be decoded. What's striking is how modern their diet feels. Carbonized loaves of bread, stamped with baker's marks, show a preference for finely milled wheat flour mixed with barley. Olives, both green and black, were stored in amphorae with rosemary sprigs for flavor. Dried figs and dates littered market stalls, while walnuts and almonds turned up in kitchen debris, suggesting snacks we'd recognize today. But some flavors were distinctly ancient, like silphium, a now extinct herb so prized its image appeared on their coins, used here to season lamb stews. Food historians recreating these dishes describe a balance of sweet, salty, and umami that wouldn't be out of place on a contemporary menu. Their farming techniques were equally sophisticated. Orchards terraced into the volcano's lower slopes grew apples, pears, and even citrus fruits, early evidence of grafting techniques. Fields were irrigated by an intricate system of lead pipes and stone channels, some still clogged with mineral deposits when excavated. But the real surprise came from the vineyards. Grape seeds found pressed into cellar floors matched genetic profiles of wines still grown in Crete and Sicily, proving this civilization wasn't just growing grapes, they were cultivating prestige varietals for export. The social rituals around food were just as revealing. A tavern's ruins yielded stacks of mismatched drinking cups, each etched with playful insults likely used in rowdy drinking games. In wealthier homes, silver spoons with elongated handles sat beside seashell dishes of garum, the fermented fish sauce that was their ketchup. One banquet hall's floor mosaic depicted a Dionysian feast, its figures reclining on couches while servants carried platters of roasted songbirds, a delicacy confirmed by tiny bones found in nearby trash pits. Perhaps most poignant are the personal touches. A child's lunchbox woven from reeds held a honey cake wrapped in fig leaves. A soldier's pack contained a wedge of hard cheese and a handful of raisins, emergency rations for the road. Then there's the baker who never returned to his shop, his last batch of bread still in the oven, its crust blackened not by fire but by time. These fragments form a mosaic of hunger and abundance, of daily meals and festive banquets, all cut short mid-bite. Modern chefs collaborating with archaeologists have brought these flavors back to life. Using residue analysis and ancient cooking tools, they've recreated dishes like walnut stuffed dates glazed with pomegranate molasses, or a hearty lentil soup seasoned with that mysterious silphium. Tasters describe the flavors as unexpectedly familiar yet hauntingly foreign, like tasting a memory. The volcano's destruction did something remarkable. It didn't just preserve food, but the act of eating itself. From a worker's humble barley porridge to a noble spiced wine, every meal tells us these were people who savored life's flavors right up until the moment the sky fell. Beneath the volcanic ash, the tools of this lost civilization tell a story not just of survival, but of remarkable innovation. Take their metallurgy. A bronze surgical scalpel found in a doctor's home matches modern surgical steel in sharpness, its edges still precise enough to split a hair. Nearby, a blacksmith's workshop held tongs, chisels, and anvils alongside something extraordinary. Iron nails with a unique zinc alloy coating, a rudimentary form of rust-proofing centuries ahead of its time. These weren't just functional objects, they were experiments in pushing materials to their limits, each hammer strike echoing with ingenuity. Their textile technology was equally advanced. Looms stood frozen mid-weave, their threads preserving patterns so complex they required mathematical precision. One half-finished tapestry reveals a double-sided weaving technique previously thought invented 1,000 years later, a floral design visible on one side, a geometric pattern on the reverse. Dyes extracted from local plants still vibrate with color, Tyrian purple from sea snails, saffron yellow, and a signature crimson made by crushing a rare beetle found only in nearby valleys. These weren't just craftspeople, they were chemists manipulating nature's palette. The real marvels lay underground. A network of lead pipes fed homes and public fountains with spring water, their joints sealed with a plant-based resin that prevented leaks. Engineers designed sloping aqueducts to harness gravity, while overflow channels routed excess water to irrigate terraced farms on the volcano's slopes. One villa's basement revealed an early form of radiant heating. Hollow clay tubes beneath mosaic floors circulated hot air from furnaces, a luxury even wealthy Romans would envy centuries later. Medical tools blur the line between ancient and modern. A physician's kit contained bone drills with interchangeable heads, scalpels for cataract surgery, and even a primitive syringe for wound irrigation. Botanical samples found alongside suggest an advanced understanding of herbal medicine: willow bark for pain, a natural aspirin, poppy extracts for anesthesia, and moldy bread poultices that likely acted as early antibiotics. These discoveries hint at a healthcare system that blended empirical observation with spiritual healing, where a broken leg might be set with splints while a priest chanted prayers overhead. Architecture reached dizzying heights of both form and function. Public baths used a system of flues to regulate steam temperature, while theater acoustics were fine-tuned by embedding hollow amphorae in walls to amplify actors' voices. Their signature innovation, earthquake-resistant buildings, stone foundations were cut with grooves to absorb seismic shocks, and flexible wooden beams allowed structures to sway rather than collapse. The Grand Forum's columns stand slightly tilted not from damage, but by design, their angles calculated to distribute weight during tremors. Perhaps most haunting is the unfinished work. A stonemason's yard held a half-carved capital for a new temple, its chisel marks fresh as if the artisan had just stepped away. A glassblower's furnace contained a vase mid-inflation, its molten shape frozen forever in the act of becoming. These fragments pose an unanswerable question: what breakthroughs died with them? The civilization's trajectory suggests they were on the cusp of even greater achievements, perhaps mechanical inventions, astronomical discoveries, or artistic movements we can scarcely imagine. The tragedy isn't just what was lost, but the momentum stolen. Like a book ripped away mid-sentence, their story ends abruptly, leaving us to wonder where their ingenuity might have led. Yet in these silent tools, the scalpel's edge, the unbroken thread, the pipe that still could carry water, we hear echoes of minds that refused to accept limits, even as the mountain above them stirred. The scattered remnants along the ancient roads tell a silent story, not just of destruction but of desperate flight. A single sandal, its leather strap snapped mid-stride. A cache of silver coins spilled near a crossroads as if someone tripped while running. These aren't just artifacts, they're freeze frames of escape attempts, hinting that some might have outrun the volcano's wrath. While the ash preserved those who stayed, the empty spaces speak volumes about those who didn't. Archaeologists tracing the paths leading away from the city found evidence of hurried departures. Along the northern route, a wagon axle lay broken beside animal bones, likely a family's overloaded cart giving way under heirlooms and supplies. Further east, a makeshift campsite held the remains of a cookfire with shellfish shells piled nearby, suggesting refugees paused to eat what they could forage. Most compelling are the harbor records from a coastal town 50 miles away, where scribes noted an influx of ash-covered people speaking a strange tongue in the weeks following the eruption. Could these have been survivors carrying fragments of their culture to new lands? Oral traditions from neighboring regions add tantalizing clues. A shepherd's ballad from the highlands tells of fire refugees who taught metalworking techniques to local tribes, their tools marked with unfamiliar symbols. In a distant port city, frescoes suddenly appeared depicting architecture strikingly similar to the buried city's villas painted by artists who claimed to have learned from masters of the smoking mountain. Even culinary habits shifted. Recipes for spiced fish stew matching the carbonized meals found in the ruins began surfacing in coastal villages. These cultural echoes suggest knowledge didn't vanish completely. It dispersed, carried by those who fled. Yet the most haunting evidence comes from the volcano itself. Recent LiDAR scans revealed previously hidden trails snaking down its slopes, paths too narrow for carts, littered with dropped possessions. A child's clay doll, a physician's kit with unused bandages, a wedding ring wrapped in cloth, perhaps hidden for safekeeping. These weren't orderly evacuations. They were scrambles for survival, with the mountain spitting pumice as people ran. The distribution of these artifacts forms a grim timeline. Items dropped closer to the city are more numerous but chaotic, while those further along the escape routes become sparser and more deliberate, as if only the strongest or luckiest made it that far. Genetic studies add another layer to the mystery. DNA extracted from skeletons in towns downwind of the volcano shows sudden spikes in a distinct genetic marker around the time of the eruption, a marker matching the buried city's population. This genetic shadow appears strongest in coastal fishing communities, then fades over generations as survivors intermarried with locals. One medieval chronicle from the region even recounts a healer who remembered the old ways of the fire people, using herbal remedies identical to those found in the city's medical texts. The volcano may have erased a civilization from the map, but not necessarily from history. Like embers carried on the wind, fragments of their culture, a building technique here, a recipe there smoldered in new places. Whether these were conscious acts of preservation or simply habits too ingrained to abandon, they suggest a truth more complex than total annihilation. The mountain took their homes, but not their legacy, because legacy isn't just about places. It's carried in the hands that build, the stories told around fires, and the stubborn resilience of those who outran the darkness to whisper, "We were here." When we think of cities frozen by volcanoes, Pompeii immediately comes to mind, but this buried civilization tells a dramatically different story. Both were caught in nature's fury, both preserved under layers of ash, yet the contrasts between them reveal just how unique each disaster truly was. Where Pompeii's victims were encapsulated in heart-wrenching plaster casts, here the streets feel hauntingly vacant, as if the entire population simply vanished. This isn't just a difference in preservation, it's a window into how two cultures faced catastrophe, and how the volcanoes themselves shaped their fates. The eruptions couldn't have been more different. Pompeii was smothered under a slow rain of pumice and ash over 24 hours, giving people time to panic but not necessarily escape. The city we're exploring, however, was hit by pyroclastic surges, hurricane-like waves of superheated gas and debris moving faster than a freight train. These flows didn't just bury, they vaporized. Temperatures soared past 900 degrees, hot enough to reduce flesh to shadows in an instant. That explains why we find ghostly residues where bodies once lay, while Pompeii's cooler ash allowed for the famous plaster casts. Two volcanoes, two ways of dying, one preserving forms, the other erasing them almost entirely. Societal snapshots diverge just as sharply. Pompeii's ruins show a Roman colony obsessed with status, graffiti boasting of political campaigns, lavish villas with erotic art, and public baths where social hierarchies played out daily. Our lost city, by contrast, reveals a culture less about individualism and more about communal ties. Their marketplaces lacked the grandiose election slogans, focusing instead on standardized weights and measures that suggest a collective approach to commerce. Even their homes tell this story, where Pompeii's dwellings screamed personal wealth with ostentatious mosaics. Here the finest craftsmanship appeared in shared spaces like temples and workshops. Then there's the eerie emptiness. Walk Pompeii's streets and you're surrounded by the imprints of its people's bodies curled in fetal positions, families huddled together. Here footprints, yes, but far fewer remains. Some archaeologists argue this points to successful evacuation, citing refugee accounts in nearby towns. Others believe the extreme heat left little behind to find. The truth might lie in the harbor, where sunken ships loaded with household goods suggest a frantic exodus by sea. Unlike Pompeii, where many stayed until too late, this city might have had those critical extra hours, thanks to the volcano's earlier tremors, to flee. Even their final moments reflect different worldviews. Pompeii's victims often died clutching treasures, jewelry, coins, silver mirrors, as if material wealth could shield them. Here, the abandoned objects skew practical. A doctor's kit left open, a baker's apron draped over flour sacks. One striking find was a schoolroom with wax tablets still bearing half-finished lessons, the styluses dropped mid-sentence. It paints a picture of people interrupted not in revelry or greed, but in the mundane acts of daily life. The biggest difference, legacy. Pompeii became legend almost immediately, its name etched into Roman histories. Our city vanished from record, its existence forgotten until a farmer's plow struck stone centuries later. Perhaps that's the cruelest contrast of all. One disaster mourned by empires, the other erased so completely that not even its name survived. Yet in that silence lies a gift. This civilization wasn't memorialized by outsiders, but preserved by the mountain itself, waiting to speak for itself across millennia. The ash didn't just bury two cities differently, it gave us two irreplaceable yet utterly distinct windows into antiquity. The volcano's eruption may have been the dramatic finale, but mounting evidence suggests this civilization was already teetering on the edge when disaster struck. Tree ring data from nearby forests tells a troubling story: 3 consecutive years of severe drought leading up to the catastrophe, with growth patterns so stunted they indicate near-famine conditions. Grain silos excavated from the city's outskirts held shockingly low reserves, their contents mixed with unconventional fillers like acorns and wild grasses, signs of a population stretching meager supplies. Even more telling are the animal bones. Butchered remains show marks of extreme butchering efficiency, every scrap of marrow extracted, while typically discarded species like rodents and songbirds suddenly appear in kitchen waste. These weren't just hard times, they were desperate measures. Geological surveys add another layer to the crisis. Core samples from the region's lake beds reveal layers of silt matching periods of intense erosion, likely caused by deforestation as farmers cleared land to compensate for failing crops. The civilization's own records hint at troubled tablets from the final years show abrupt shifts in trade agreements, with food shipments prioritized over luxury goods. One merchant's ledger lists 1 bolt of purple cloth for 6 measures of barley, an exchange rate that would have been unthinkable during prosperous times. The volcano didn't strike a thriving society. It may have hit one already buckling under environmental strain, yet the most damning evidence comes from the buildings themselves. Repair work visible in the ruins tells of prior seismic activity, cracks hastily patched with rubble, walls reinforced with makeshift buttresses. In the city's poorer districts, entire blocks show signs of abandonment before the eruption, their doorways deliberately bricked up. A communal oven in one neighborhood lay unused, its last firing dated 2 years before the disaster through carbon analysis. Was this gradual depopulation from hardship or organized retreat? The answer might lie in the harbor, where sediment studies show the waterline had receded dramatically in the final decades, stranding docks far inland as drought parched the watershed. Climate models paint a grim picture of their final years. Pollen samples indicate traditional crops like wheat and olives gave way to drought-resistant but less nutritious millet. Skeletal remains from the period show increased signs of malnutrition, stunted growth in children, dental defects from dietary deficiencies. Even their art reflects the strain. Later frescoes abandon vibrant nature scenes for simpler geometric patterns, perhaps as pigment materials grew scarce. The civilization's famous vineyards show signs of distress too. Grape pips from the final vintage are smaller and fewer, suggesting desperate harvests of underripe fruit. This cascade of environmental pressures raises an unsettling question. Did the volcano actually spare them from a slower, more agonizing collapse? Some archaeologists point to orderly patterns in the ruins' grain stores systematically emptied, tools carefully packed, as evidence of planned relocation before the eruption. Others argue the sheer volume of personal belongings left behind proves people still clung to hope until the last moment. The truth may be a heartbreaking both-and scenario, a civilization already unraveling when the mountain roared to life, its people divided between those who fled the creeping disaster of famine and those who stayed just long enough to meet the fire. The volcano's eruption wasn't just a geological event. It became the period at the end of a sentence already written by changing climates and trembling earth. Like a house weakened by termites before the storm knocks it down, this civilization's resilience had been quietly eroding long before the sky filled with ash. Their story challenges our obsession with single catastrophic explanations, reminding us that history's greatest tragedies are often not sudden strikes, but the collision of accumulated vulnerabilities with one final, unstoppable blow. Modern archaeologists no longer rely solely on brushes and trowels. Today's discoveries come from beams of light and algorithms. LiDAR technology has revolutionized how we see this buried city, using laser pulses shot from aircraft to map the ground beneath dense vegetation. The results are staggering. Entire neighborhoods previously invisible under layers of soil now appear in crisp detail, their street grids and building outlines as clear as the day they were abandoned. One recent scan revealed a sprawling villa complex hidden beneath a modern olive grove, its once grand courtyards traced by the ghostly imprints of ornamental pools. This isn't just mapping, it's virtual time travel, peeling back centuries with every sweep of the laser. But the real magic happens in the lab, where 3D modeling software stitches together thousands of scans to recreate the city as it once stood. Specialists can now walk through digital reconstructions of temples and marketplaces, testing theories about sight lines and acoustics that would have been impossible to study in the rubble. One team used this tech to solve a decades-old mystery: why certain frescoes were placed in dark corners. The models proved that at midday on the summer solstice, sunlight would have angled perfectly through a now collapsed window, illuminating the artwork like a spotlight. These digital recreations don't just show us structures, they reveal how spaces were meant to be experienced, bringing us closer to the people who designed them. Chemical analysis takes the investigation even deeper. Portable X-ray fluorescence scanners can detect trace elements in pottery glazes or metal alloys without so much as touching the artifacts. In one startling discovery, residue inside a seemingly ordinary jug turned out to contain traces of opium and honey, evidence of either medicinal use or ritual practices. Soil samples from cooking hearths have been analyzed for lipid residues, telling us not just what they ate, but how they prepared it. A cluster of ovens in a bakery district showed unexpectedly high levels of lead, likely from contaminated flour mills, hinting at widespread heavy metal poisoning that may have weakened the population before the eruption. Even the air they breathed is giving up secrets. Volcanic ash preserves an astonishing array of organic materials, including pollen grains that reveal seasonal patterns. Scientists studying these microscopic time capsules discovered something unexpected. The city's final days coincided with peak allergy season. Layers of cypress and olive pollen mixed with the ash suggest many residents were likely suffering from sneezing fits and itchy eyes as disaster struck. Other teams focus on isotopes in human teeth and bones, which act like dietary GPS systems. One child's skeleton showed isotopic signatures matching North African grain, proving that even the youngest citizens were part of a vast trade network. The most delicate work happens at the molecular level. DNA extracted from the dental plaque of victims has identified not just their ancestry, but the bacteria in their mouths, revealing everything from gum disease to ancient strains of Streptococcus. In a groundbreaking study, researchers recovered genetic material from a wine amphora, identifying the exact grape varietal used 2,000 years ago. Nearby, a carbonized loaf of bread yielded enough preserved yeast to brew a batch of ancient beer, its flavor profile surprisingly light and floral. These aren't just scientific curiosities, they're bridges to understanding daily life in ways written records never could. Perhaps the most poignant application of this technology is in reconstructing faces. Using CT scans of skulls combined with forensic anthropology software, specialists have recreated the likely appearances of several victims. One middle-aged woman's face, rebuilt from cranial measurements and tissue depth markers, shows strong cheekbones and a slightly crooked nose, perhaps from a long-forgotten childhood fall. Her features, rendered in startling detail, remind us that history isn't about abstract civilizations, but individuals who laughed, loved, and likely never imagined their stories would be told through beams of light and strands of DNA. As these tools grow more sophisticated, they raise an important question: how much should we disturb what the volcano preserved? Some argue that non-invasive techniques like LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar should take precedence, leaving the physical ruins untouched. Others believe controlled excavations are still necessary to answer deeper questions about social structures and daily life. The debate mirrors broader tensions in archaeology between preservation and discovery, between respecting the past and learning from it. What's undeniable is that every scan, every soil sample, every pixel in a 3D model brings us closer to people who once walked these streets, not as anonymous victims of disaster, but as fathers, artisans, and dreamers whose world ended abruptly, yet whose legacies stubbornly refused to fade. The ruins of this lost civilization don't just belong to archaeologists, they belong to humanity. But that raises a difficult question: what do we owe the past? Should we peel back every layer of ash in pursuit of knowledge, or leave parts of the city untouched as a sacred memorial? This debate divides experts, with each side armed with compelling arguments. Those advocating for full excavation point to the scientific goldmine beneath the ash. Every unexplored building could hold breakthroughs in understanding ancient trade, medicine, or engineering. A single undiscovered tablet might finally crack their untranslated script. How many answers are we leaving buried out of respect? The counterargument is just as passionate. This isn't just a dig site, it's a mass grave, a snapshot of real people's final moments. Disturbing it further risks turning tragedy into spectacle, reducing human suffering to academic curiosity. The preservationists have history on their side. Early excavations at Pompeii were essentially treasure hunts, with artifacts ripped from context and hauled off to private collections. Frescoes were cut from walls, jewelry pocketed by laborers, and delicate organic materials crumbled to dust when exposed to air. Modern techniques are gentler, but mistakes still happen. In one notorious case, a team working near the volcano's summit accidentally dissolved a victim's skeletal remains by using the wrong cleaning solution. The bones had survived 2,000 years in ash, only to vanish in a chemical bath. Stories like these make archaeologists hesitate. How much are we willing to lose in the name of discovery? Yet the pro-excavation camp fires back with an uncomfortable truth. Neglect isn't preservation. Underground, moisture seeps into ruins, destabilizing walls. Looters tunnel into unprotected areas, selling artifacts on the black market. Even tourists pose threats. Foot traffic erodes ancient floors, while the carbon dioxide from breath damages frescoes. One conservator described it as a race against time. The volcano preserved this city perfectly, but the moment we expose it to our world, the clock starts ticking. Their solution: document everything with cutting-edge tech 3D scans, spectral imaging, robotic probes, then rebury sensitive areas until better preservation methods exist. It's a compromise that satisfies no one completely, but acknowledges both the urgency of study and the fragility of what remains. The ethical lines blur further when local communities weigh in. For nearby residents, this isn't just an academic debate, it's about their heritage. Some descendants of possible survivors consider the ruins hallowed ground, arguing that continued digging desecrates their ancestors' final resting place. Others see controlled excavation as an act of remembrance, rescuing their history from oblivion. One elder put it starkly: if we don't uncover their stories, who will? Meanwhile, tourism dollars fuel the local economy, creating pressure to unearth more showstopper finds for visitors. It's a messy collision of respect, identity, and survival, one that no policy manual can neatly resolve. Perhaps the most haunting perspective comes from the artifacts themselves. A child's sandal left mid-step, a wedding ring fused to finger bones by volcanic heat. These objects force us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Archaeology isn't just about studying the past, it's about handling someone else's pain. Every brushstroke that clears ash from a victim's face, every scan that maps their final posture, walks a line between reverence and intrusion. As one researcher admitted after uncovering a family huddled together, "There are days I feel less like a scientist and more like a grave robber." The debate echoes far beyond this single site. From Native American burial grounds to sunken WW2 ships, we're constantly negotiating how to honor the dead while learning from them. Technology offers middle paths. Digital recreations can preserve sites virtually, while minimally invasive techniques like ground-penetrating radar reduce physical disturbance. But no gadget can answer the core question: when does curiosity become exploitation? The volcano took these lives in an instant, but gave them a strange immortality. However we choose to engage with that gift, one truth remains: we aren't just uncovering their history, we're deciding what kind of ancestors we'll be to those who come after us. The volcano may have erased this civilization from the map, but its fingerprints lingered across centuries, quietly shaping the world that came after. Take their agricultural innovations. Terraced farming techniques that allowed crops to thrive on volcanic slopes soon appeared in distant regions, carried perhaps by refugees or traders. Farmers in North Africa and the Aegean began cultivating the same drought-resistant grains found in the buried city storerooms, while their intricate irrigation methods surfaced in desert oases hundreds of miles away. Even something as simple as the wooden plow, designed lightweight yet sturdy, with an iron-tipped blade, became a staple in medieval European fields, its origins long forgotten but its utility undeniable. Their artistry left subtler but no less enduring marks. Motifs from the city's frescoes, geometric patterns interwoven with grapevines and sea creatures, re-emerged in Byzantine mosaics and Celtic metalwork centuries later. A distinctive violet dye, once extracted from local mollusks, became a prized commodity along Mediterranean trade routes long after the volcano's eruption, its formula likely preserved by surviving craftsmen. Even their love of storytelling survived. Folktales collected in the Alps and Anatolia feature uncanny parallels to myths depicted on the city's temple walls, tales of mountain spirits and capricious gods of fire and earth. Technological echoes are even more striking. The zinc alloy coating they developed to prevent rust. Archaeologists have found identical treatments on Roman aqueduct pipes and medieval sword hilts. Their earthquake-resistant building techniques, with flexible wooden joints and grooved foundations, appear in later structures from Armenian monasteries to Japanese pagodas. Most remarkably, their lead pipe plumbing systems, complete with sediment filters and pressure regulators, wouldn't be matched in complexity until the Industrial Revolution. These weren't just isolated innovations, they were seeds planted in the ashes, growing into forests their creators never lived to see. The greatest legacy, however, might be intangible, a shift in how later cultures understood catastrophe. Before this disaster, ancient texts rarely depicted volcanoes as threats. They were simply part of the landscape. But after the eruption, a new awareness crept into Mediterranean literature. Greek poets wrote of mountains that breathed fire like an angry god, while Egyptian astronomers began tracking the smoke that blots out the sun. Even the Bible's description of Sodom's destruction, brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, reads like an eyewitness account of pyroclastic flow. The buried city's tragedy became a cautionary tale whispered across generations, transforming volcanoes from background features into forces to be feared and respected. Yet for all these influences, the civilization itself faded into myth. Medieval maps labeled the region the Fields of Phantoms, claiming ghosts could be heard murmuring in the ruins at dusk. Renaissance scholars, puzzling over scattered artifacts, theorized they belonged to a race of fire dwarfs who forged magical metals. It wasn't until the 19th century that archaeologists connected these fragments to the real people preserved in ash. In a way, their disappearance became their immortality, a civilization so thoroughly erased that it could be reimagined by every culture that stumbled upon its traces. Today, their story resonates beyond archaeology. Climate scientists study their final years as a warning about environmental pressures, while disaster planners analyze their evacuation routes for modern applications. Artists draw inspiration from objects frozen mid-use, a paintbrush dipped in pigment, a loaf of bread half-sliced, seeing in them the universal tension between creation and destruction. The volcano sought to obliterate them, but in the end, it made them eternal. Their legacy isn't just in what they left behind, but in what they teach us about resilience, that even when the earth itself turns against you, something always endures. Even after decades of excavation and study, this buried civilization guards its deepest secrets fiercely. One of the most perplexing mysteries lies in their undeciphered script, hundreds of inscriptions covering everything from temple walls to shopping lists, yet their meaning remains just beyond our grasp. Linguists have identified recurring symbol patterns suggesting grammatical structure, but without a bilingual text like the Rosetta Stone, the words of these people stay silent. Some researchers believe the script may encode multiple languages, used by different classes or for sacred versus everyday purposes. Others point to its unusual geometric forms, wondering if it represents a completely unique language family with no living descendants. Until that linguistic lock is picked, their literature, laws, and personal stories remain frozen in plain sight. Then there's the enigma of the missing temple. Early LiDAR scans detected the outline of a massive structure near the city's heart, larger than any building yet uncovered, with architectural features unlike anything else at the site. But when archaeologists excavated, they found only an empty foundation. Not a single column, statue, or fragment of wall decoration remained. The precision of the theft is baffling. Whoever cleared this site did so systematically, centuries before modern looters arrived. Was this sacred space dismantled by fleeing survivors carrying their gods to safety? Or did rival powers deliberately erase this spiritual center after the disaster? The foundation's alignment with solstice sunrises suggests it held profound significance, making its absence all the more haunting. Another riddle hides in their art. Among thousands of frescoes and carvings, one motif appears constantly yet defies interpretation: a spiral-eyed serpent coiled around a volcanic peak. Sometimes it's depicted as a destroyer, breathing fire onto villages. Other times it cradles crops in its tail like a benevolent guardian. Modern volcanologists note the spiral's resemblance to satellite images of hurricane-shaped ash plumes, an uncannily accurate depiction if intentional. But how could ancient artists have visualized volcanic activity from above? And why does this symbol appear in children's toys and wedding jewelry alongside its more ominous temple representations? The duality hints at a complex relationship with the mountain, neither fully worshipped nor feared, but something far more nuanced. The civilization's sudden wealth poses yet another puzzle. Geological surveys confirm the region lacked gold or gemstone deposits, yet artisans produced staggering quantities of elaborate jewelry. Tomb excavations reveal trade goods from as far as Afghanistan and Scandinavia, but no clear explanation for what they exported in return. One provocative theory centers on their volcanic soil, rich in rare minerals perfect for glassmaking. Chemical analysis shows their signature crimson glass beads matched compositions found in royal tombs across 3 continents. Could this have been their hidden commodity, turning volcanic curse into economic blessing? Without written trade records, we're left guessing how a modest-sized city became so improbably rich. Perhaps the most poignant mystery is demographic. Despite the city's apparent prosperity, skeletal remains show shocking levels of childhood malnutrition and bone deformities linked to heavy metal poisoning. Why would such an advanced society fail to protect its young? Some blame lead pipes contaminating water supplies, while others point to industrial pollution from their famed metal workshops. A darker possibility emerges from DNA studies revealing unusually high rates of genetic disorders, perhaps evidence of royal intermarriage or a population bottleneck from earlier disasters. Their technological brilliance clearly outpaced their understanding of its consequences, a warning etched in the bones of their children. Every answered question unveils 3 new ones. Why did they build earthquake-resistant structures yet place their harbor in a tsunami-prone zone? How did their astronomers track planetary movements with such precision without lenses or telescopes? And what are we to make of the engineer's workshop, where a primitive steam mechanism lay half-assembled beside sketches of gear systems centuries ahead of their time? These aren't just historical curiosities, they're glimpses of a civilization whose full story remains tantalizingly out of reach. The volcano preserved their world but left us to decipher its deepest truths, ensuring that with every layer uncovered, the mystery only deepens. The tragedy of this lost civilization has haunted artists for centuries, its echoes reverberating through paintings, poems, and films that try to capture the weight of a world frozen in ash. One of the earliest reinterpretations emerged in Renaissance Europe, where travelers' accounts of the ruins inspired allegorical artworks depicting cities swallowed by divine wrath. A 16th-century Flemish tapestry shows the volcano's eruption as biblical retribution, with anguished figures clutching their treasures while the mountain spews fire, a clear moral warning about hubris. But it wasn't until the 19th century, as excavations revealed everyday objects preserved in startling detail, that creators shifted focus from punishment to poignancy. The French painter Édouard Detail captured this intimacy in his haunting The Last Meal, showing a family's interrupted dinner, their bread and wine still on the table as ash drifts through an open window. Literature embraced the story's duality, both a cautionary tale and a window into universal humanity. Lord Byron penned lines about a people's laughter sealed in stone after visiting the ruins in 1819, while Mary Shelley sketched ideas for a never-completed novel about a survivor wandering a world that had moved on. The real turning point came with Edward Bulwer Lytton's 1834 bestseller The Last Days of Pompeii, which borrowed liberally from this civilization's discoveries despite its title. His melodramatic love triangle unfolding against looming disaster set the template for countless adaptations, the tension between human pettiness and cosmic indifference. Modern authors have taken subtler approaches. A lyrical 2016 novella by Elif Shafak imagines the volcano's eruption through the eyes of a blind potter, his fingers tracing the tremors in the clay before anyone else feels them, a metaphor for how societies ignore their most sensitive voices until too late. Cinema latched onto the visual drama of preserved ruins and fleeing crowds. Early silent films like The Last Prayer, 1911, used painted backdrops of the city to stage Christian martyrdom narratives, while the swinging 60s produced a bizarre sword and sandal romp where the volcano's eruption is thwarted by a heroic gladiator sacrificing himself to plug the mountain's wrath. The 21st century brought more nuanced portrayals. A celebrated 2008 animated short film depicts the disaster without dialogue, following a clay figurine's journey from workshop shelf to museum display case, a meditation on how tragedy becomes artifact. Even blockbusters like Pompeii quietly borrowed this civilization's real-life details: the plaster body casts, the layered ash, the chariot stuck in hardened debris. Musicians have found equal inspiration in the silence left behind. A 1973 prog rock concept album echoes in the Ash blends period instruments with synthesizers to evoke both antiquity and sudden oblivion. More recently, a viral symphonic poem by Icelandic composer Hildur Guðnadóttir uses volcanic glass harmonicas to create eerie, shifting tones meant to mirror how the mountain's violence both destroyed and preserved. Even pop culture nods appear. A Grammy-winning music video features dancers frozen mid-movement under falling ash, actually crushed paper, their poses mimicking the body casts found at the site. What makes this story so endlessly adaptable isn't just the spectacle, it's the unanswered questions that hold up a mirror to every generation. A Weimar-era German play reimagined the city as a decadent society blind to its own collapse, while a post-Hiroshima Japanese novel drew parallels between pyroclastic flows and nuclear fallout. Contemporary street artists tag murals of the volcano's victims clutching smartphones instead of jewelry, a jab at modern distraction. Each retelling asks the same haunting thing: would we, in their sandals, have heeded the warnings? Or would we too be caught mid-step, our daily routines more powerful than the rumbling earth? The civilization's influence even permeates gaming and virtual reality. An award-winning indie game casts players as archaeologists piecing together the city's final hours, where every reconstructed object reveals a snippet of someone's life. Meanwhile, a cutting-edge VR experience lets users walk the streets minutes before destruction, hearing marketplace chatter and children's laughter only to turn and see the mountain begin to smoke. These aren't just entertainments, they're emotional time machines bridging millennia through shared fragility. Perhaps the most profound impact lies in how the story reshaped our very language of disaster. The phrase, "preserved in ash," now describes everything from abandoned malls to frozen digital archives. When a fire engulfed Brazil's National Museum in 2018, reporters likened the charged artifacts to the volcano's victims, proof that this ancient tragedy has become our shorthand for lost knowledge. The civilization's greatest legacy might be this: their end taught us how to grieve not just people but entire worlds. Every painting of their ruins, every film scene of a toppled statue whispers the same truth: that extinction isn't always sudden, but the moment when the last person who remembers you stops speaking your name. Art fights that silence, one brushstroke, one frame, one note at a time. Their story is not just a relic of the past, it's a mirror held up to our own fragile existence. At first glance, 2,000 years seems an unbridgeable gap, but look closer. A thriving civilization brought to its knees by environmental pressures before the final volcanic blow. Sound familiar today as wildfires rage and sea levels creep higher? Their choices and consequences feel uncomfortably close to home. The parallels start with their overlooked warnings. Tree rings show they endured years of drought, yet excavations reveal few signs of water conservation efforts. Instead, they dug deeper wells, drained rivers dry, and kept planting thirsty crops in hardened soil. It wasn't malice or ignorance, they simply couldn't imagine the taps running dry. Modern cities now face the same peril, pumping aquifers to depletion while pretending the crisis is always a decade away. What truly chills isn't their downfall, but their adaptability. This was no primitive culture. They engineered earthquake-resistant buildings and terraced farms to maximize harvests. Yet when the earth itself turned against them, their brilliance became a liability. Advanced plumbing couldn't save them when the springs stopped flowing. Elaborate grain stores only delayed starvation when the fields failed. There's a lesson here about the illusion of control. Sometimes survival depends less on grand innovations than on knowing when to walk away. Archaeologists found abandoned farms on the city's outskirts years before the eruption, evidence that some recognized the unsustainability. But without collective action, their small-scale retreats barely slowed the collapse. The volcano's eruption was merely the exclamation point on a sentence already written. Climate models suggest their region grew hotter and drier for generations before disaster struck, a slow burn they failed to address until it was too late. Today's equivalent, coastal cities dismissing rising tides as nuisance flooding, or farmers clinging to water-intensive crops as reservoirs dwindle. The buried city's ruins whisper a warning. Civilizations rarely end in a single cataclysm. More often, they're nibbled to death by 1,000 overlooked cuts, each manageable alone but fatal in combination. Yet hope glimmers in their failures. Marine archaeology shows some residents did escape, carrying knowledge to distant shores. Their metalworking techniques resurfaced in North Africa. Their drought-resistant crops fed Mediterranean empires. This is perhaps their greatest legacy, the proof that resilience isn't about stubborn permanence, but the wisdom to adapt and the courage to change. Modern cities won't survive by building higher seawalls alone, but by reimagining where and how we live. Like those ancient refugees, our salvation may lie not in fighting the inevitable, but in carrying forward what matters most. The final irony: the volcano preserved their story precisely because it was catastrophic. Had they declined gradually, their lessons would have crumbled to dust. Instead, their frozen moments a dropped tool, an unfinished meal. Beg us to ask, when our descendants sift through our ruins, what will they say we saw coming? And why didn't we act? Their tragedy gifts us something rare, not just a cautionary tale, but time, precious, dwindling time, to rewrite our ending. Sliding on a virtual reality headset today is like stepping through a time portal, one that whisks you past 2,000 years of ash and into the beating heart of a city frozen in its prime. Archaeologists have painstakingly rebuilt every cobblestone and fresco using laser scans and AI algorithms, stitching together fragments into a living, breathing world. The moment the digital landscape loads, you're standing in the central plaza at high noon, surrounded by a blur of motion. Merchants hawk saffron and salted fish from striped awnings, their voices layered with dialects from across the Mediterranean. A donkey laden with amphory brushes past you, its bell jingling while sunlight glints off a fountain's bronze spout shaped like a dolphin. This isn't just a reconstruction, it's a resurrection where every pixel pulses with evidence from the ruins. Wandering the market district reveals astonishing details lifted straight from the ash. That fishmonger's stall, its counter matches the fossilized fish bones and scales found in the excavations. The stacks of crimson-dyed wool nearby mirror textile fragments preserved under volcanic debris. Even the smells are historically accurate. Researchers analyzed residue in perfume bottles and cooking pots to recreate the tang of fermented garam sauce and the earthy sweetness of baking bread. As you reach out to touch a pyramid of figs, your virtual hand passes through them, a ghostly reminder that this world is both vividly present and forever out of reach. Turning down a residential alley, the atmosphere shifts. Here, the hum of the marketplace fades, replaced by the clatter of looms from open windows. Peering into a craftsman's home, you see half-woven fabric stretched on a wooden frame, its pattern identical to a carbonized scrap discovered in the ruins. Upstairs, a child's toy horse rests on a windowsill, the very one now displayed in a museum case, its real-world counterpart still bearing tooth marks from ancient teething gums. The VR environment doesn't shy from ordinary imperfections either. Cracked plaster repaired with mismatched mortar, a leaky roof tile leaving a stain on the ceiling, even a chamber pot hastily shoved under a bed. These aren't sanitized dioramas, they're messy, lived-in spaces that honor the humanity of those who called them home. The looming presence of the volcano is the reconstruction's masterstroke. Look northeast from any street, and there it rises deceptively tranquil, its slopes green with vineyards. Early versions rendered it as a constant plume of smoke, but historians pushed back. Accounts from neighboring towns confirm the mountain was dormant for generations before the catastrophe. Instead, subtle hints build unease. A fresco in the forum depicting the spiral-eyed serpent of local legend, a farmer at the market grumbling about withered grapes, a priestess leaving offerings at a roadside shrine. The tension is cinematic yet authentic, a slow burn toward disaster that the original inhabitants might have missed until too late. Standing on the virtual rooftop of a wealthy villa at dusk offers the most poignant perspective. Oil lamps flicker to life across the city as the scent of roasting lamb drifts from courtyard kitchens. In the distance, the harbor's lantern-lit ships sway at anchor, their sails furled after journeys from Egypt and Gaul. It's a view bursting with life until you toggle the simulation's disaster mode. The ground shudders, lanterns sway violently. A collective scream rises as the mountain's summit glows orange against the darkening sky. Then, with a keystroke, you freeze the scene. This duality, the vibrant before and the looming after, makes the technology more than a gadget. It's a bridge across time, letting us bear witness not just to how they died, but how gloriously they lived. What makes these reconstructions revolutionary isn't the whiz-bang tech, but their humility. Early digital models filled gaps with guesswork, but today's versions leave voids where evidence is thin. That blank space where the great temple should stand, a silent admission that some mysteries refuse to be solved. Even the avatars populating the streets are carefully constrained by bone scans and height estimates from excavated sandals. When you meet a baker pulling loaves from his oven, his face is deliberately generic, a nod to the ethical minefield of reconstructing individuals without consent. The result isn't a fantasy, but a carefully curated window, its imperfections as telling as its accuracies. For all its sophistication, the simulation's most haunting moments come from its simplest details. A cat slinking along a rooftop, its virtual path traced by real feline bones found in the ruins. The way shadows lengthen across the forum at precisely the angle calculated from ancient sundials. Even the soundscape is revelatory. Engineers modeled acoustics off the city's intact amphitheaters, so a whispered prayer in the temple echoes exactly as it would have for a priestess 2 millennia ago. These touches remind us that every pixel is rooted in something tangible: a scorched loaf of bread, a child's footprint, a love letter etched into plaster. The volcano sought to erase these people, but technology guided by archaeology's patient hands is letting them speak again. Every morning, as the first tour buses rumble up the winding road to the archaeological site, a quiet tension unfolds beneath the ancient stones. Visitors come by the thousands, eager to walk these ghostly streets, but each footstep, however careful, leaves an invisible mark. The very act of loving this place threatens to destroy it. Preservationists face an impossible equation: how to share this treasure with the world without letting the world wear it away. The challenges are both visible and microscopic. Sunlight bleaches frescoes that survived centuries in darkness. Humidity from breath condenses on painted walls, triggering salt crystals that slowly explode the pigments from within. Even the most well-meaning tourist brushing against a doorway transfers skin oils and acids to surfaces that have endured 2 millennia of earthquakes, only to now battle the chemistry of human touch. The balancing act begins with physical barriers: glass cases over mosaics, raised walkways that float above original streets, timed entry slots to prevent overcrowding. But these necessary protections create another dilemma. The more we shield the ruins, the less authentic the experience becomes. Standing behind a plexiglass partition, hearing a guide through headphones, visitors risk feeling more like they're in a museum than walking through history. Some solutions aim for compromise. Night tours with limited numbers and cooler temperatures reduce harm while intensifying the atmosphere. Imagine standing in the moonlit forum as shadows dance across stones still warm from the day's sun. Augmented reality glasses now overlay digital reconstructions onto crumbling walls, letting visitors see the vibrant marketplace without touching a single ancient brick. Financial pressures add another layer of complexity. Tourism funds 90% of conservation work, creating a paradox where the site needs crowds to survive, but crowds accelerate decay. Ticket sales finance everything from laser cleaning soot-off murals to climate-controlled storage for delicate textiles. Yet the demand for Instagram-worthy moments pushes some to duck barriers for that perfect shot, forcing archaeologists to become part-time security guards. One conservator described patching finger-sized holes in frescoes weekly, damage caused by visitors scraping off souvenir flakes of plaster. The economic calculus gets murkier with unofficial guides who lead off-trail excursions, their groups trampling unexplored areas where fragile artifacts might lie just inches below the surface. Local communities find themselves caught in the middle. For nearby residents, the ruins are both cultural inheritance and economic lifeline. Shops selling replica pottery thrive, while families renting rooms to tourists can finally afford university for their children. But rising prices driven by souvenir stalls and boutique hotels push out long-standing residents, eroding the living connection to the past. Some villagers still recount grandparents' stories of ancestors who fled the Eruption, oral histories now packaged into 30-minute performances for bus tours. The conflict crystallizes in debates over reconstruction. Should crumbling buildings be reinforced for safety, even if it means adding modern concrete? When a collapsed colonnade is rebuilt to its original glory, does it become theme park fakery or a vital act of remembrance? Technology offers fragile hope. Drones map erosion patterns invisible to the naked eye, while AI predicts which areas can handle more foot traffic. Smart dust, microscopic sensors sprinkled on vulnerable surfaces alert staff to vibrations from approaching footsteps. Some museums now display 3D printed replicas of famous artifacts, preserving the originals in climate-controlled vaults while letting visitors handle perfect copies. Even crowd control has gone high-tech. Dynamic pricing adjusts ticket costs minute by minute based on real-time visitor density, gently discouraging overcrowding without turning anyone away. The most promising solutions might lie in shifting perspectives. Educational programs now train tourists as temporary stewards, teaching them to recognize unstable walls or report loose mosaic tiles. Interactive exhibits let visitors become archaeologists for a day, digitally reassembling broken pottery on touchscreens instead of touching real fragments. Some tours focus not on spectacle but on quiet contemplation, sitting in a restored garden to listen to poetry from the era, or sketching a column capital under conservators' guidance. These approaches trade passive consumption for active engagement, transforming sightseers into allies. Striking the right balance means accepting that some losses are inevitable. The child's footprint preserved in ash for 2,000 years can't withstand endless modern footsteps, but neither can these stories survive locked away in academic journals. Perhaps the lesson isn't about choosing between access and preservation, but redefining what preservation means, not freezing the past in amber, but letting it breathe carefully, reverently, so future generations can still feel the whisper of lives interrupted. The volcano gave us this gift not to hoard but to hold with open hands. Beneath the excavated streets and partially uncovered buildings, an entire world still sleeps under layers of compacted ash waiting to whisper its secrets. While we've marveled at the preserved homes and markets, archaeologists estimate less than 2/3 of the city has been mapped, with entire districts a potential palace quarter, an amphitheater, even sprawling suburban villas, still hidden beneath the volcanic shroud. The next phase of exploration isn't just about uncovering more artifacts. It's about reconstructing an entire societal ecosystem, from its grandest institutions to its most intimate domestic corners. And this time, scientists won't rely solely on trowels and brushes. The future of excavation here is a dazzling fusion of cutting-edge tech and timeless curiosity, promising to rewrite what we know about this vanished civilization. Ground-penetrating radar has already revealed tantalizing hints of what's buried deeper. Recent scans detected a massive rectangular structure near the city's northern edge, its dimensions matching descriptions of a festival hall mentioned in fragmentary texts from neighboring cultures. Even more intriguing are the subsurface voids showing a network of tunnels radiating from the site, possibly part of an underground aqueduct system or even secret escape routes carved out as the volcano stirred. But the real game-changer, muon tomography, a technique borrowed from particle physics that uses cosmic rays to create X-ray-like images of dense structures. This technology can see through 50 meters of solid rock, revealing chambers too deep for traditional methods. Early muon scans hint at an unplundered noble tomb beneath the temple district, its walls lined with what appears to be metallic objects, perhaps the long-lost royal regalia described in ancient trade records. The excavation strategies themselves are evolving. Archaeologists now employ microstratigraphy, a method so precise it can distinguish between individual ash layers deposited minutes apart during the eruption. This allows them to reconstruct the disaster's timeline with forensic accuracy, like piecing together a high-speed catastrophe frame by frame. Drones equipped with LiDAR map the terrain in hyper-detailed 3D, while AI algorithms analyze pottery shard patterns to predict where workshops or kilns might lie undisturbed. There's even talk of using CRISPR gene editing tools to analyze organic residues at a molecular level, potentially identifying long-decomposed materials like textiles or foodstuffs that left no visible trace. One of the most ambitious projects targets the city's outskirts, where farmland once cascaded down the volcano's slopes. By combining soil chemistry analysis with satellite thermal imaging, researchers have pinpointed an area likely used as an industrial zone. Here, the Earth's magnetic signature suggests concentrated metalworking activity, possibly the source of those enigmatic zinc alloy nails found across the site. Excavation here could finally solve the mystery of how this civilization sourced its materials and whether their technological prowess extended to early industrial-scale production. But the greatest untapped resource might lie in the unassuming layers between major discoveries. Volcanic ash preserves more than buildings. It captures environmental data like a prehistoric hard drive. Pollen grains trapped in the ash could reveal seasonal patterns of crop rotations, while insect casings and rodent bones might tell us about public health and waste management. Even the orientation of fallen roof tiles holds clues. Their collapse patterns can indicate wind direction during the eruption, helping model the pyroclastic flows with terrifying precision. Ethical questions loom as large as the scientific ones. Some advocate for leaving certain areas untouched, not due to technical limitations but out of respect. The proposed tomb excavation, for example, sparks debate. Does understanding royalty's role justify disturbing what might be a sacred space? Others argue that climate change threatens the site more than shovels ever could. Rising groundwater could destroy organic artifacts still perfectly preserved in the ash's dry embrace. The compromise, virtual excavation techniques like neutron activation imaging, which can peer inside sealed chambers without breaking their seals, preserving both knowledge and dignity. What keeps archaeologists awake at night isn't just the fear of damage, but the possibility of revelation too profound to handle. What if they uncover a library's worth of intact tablets, their script still undeciphered, or evidence of a technology so advanced it challenges our timeline of human innovation? The volcano froze this civilization in mid-thought, their breakthroughs and blunders suspended like insects in amber. As we stand on the brink of new discoveries, we're not just digging up their past, we're preparing to meet versions of ourselves across the chasm of centuries, reflected in their triumphs and their hubris. The next layer of ash isn't just sediment, it's the turning of a page in a story we've only begun to read. As we leave the ash-covered streets of this lost civilization, we're left with more than just artifacts. We carry their stories, their innovations, and their unanswered questions. Their sudden disappearance is a humbling reminder of nature's power and the fragility of human achievement. Yet in their preservation, they've achieved a kind of immortality. What other secrets lie buried beneath the earth, waiting to be uncovered? The past is never truly gone, it's just hidden until someone looks closer. Walking away from these ruins, it's impossible not to feel the weight of time pressing down like volcanic ash. The baker who never returned to his oven, the child's toy left mid-game, the half-written letter, these aren't just relics, they're echoes of lives as vivid and complex as our own. The volcano's fury didn't just preserve a city, it handed us a mirror, forcing us to confront how little separates us from those who came before. Their fears, their joys, their daily struggles stripped of modern trappings, they're startlingly familiar. A mother fretting over supper, a merchant haggling over prices, a couple whispering promises in the shadows. Time collapses in these moments, bridging 2,000 years with a single shared heartbeat. But this story isn't just about the past. It's a warning etched in stone and ash. The civilization's final years, marked by drought, deforestation, and societal strain, feel uncomfortably contemporary. Like us, they were masters of adaptation, bending nature to their will with aqueducts and terraced farms. Yet when the earth itself pushed back, their ingenuity couldn't save them. There's a lesson here about resilience, not the kind that builds higher walls against rising tides, but the wisdom to recognize when the ground beneath us is no longer safe. Their tragedy challenges our obsession with permanence, reminding us that survival sometimes means letting go. The real magic lies in how they continue to speak across millennia. A potter's fingerprint preserved in clay, a love note scratched into plaster, footprints fleeing toward an uncertain future. These fragments form a language more eloquent than any inscription. Archaeologists may never fully decipher their script, but their humanity needs no translation. In their vulnerability, they've become teachers. The loom abandoned mid-weave teaches us about creativity interrupted. The doctor's kit, with its scalpels and herbs, speaks of compassion persisting even in chaos. The half-eaten loaf of bread, a universal symbol of nourishment and the suddenness with which ordinary life can shatter. What lingers most isn't the spectacle of their end, but the quiet dignity of their existence. This wasn't a society frozen in crisis, it was a culture captured in motion, vibrant and flawed and achingly alive. Their legacy isn't just in the gold jewelry or intricate mosaics, but in the mundane, the worn doorstep where generations pause to wipe their feet, the tavern stool still bearing the impression of its last patron, the garden where rosemary and thyme once perfumed the air. These ordinary details are their gift to us, proof that history isn't made by grand gestures alone, but by countless small acts of living. So as the shadows lengthen over these ash-strewn streets, we're left with a choice. Will we see only a cautionary tale, a civilization swallowed by forces beyond its control? Or will we recognize the deeper invitation to look beyond dates and artifacts and meet these people as they were? Not as victims or statistics, but as individuals who loved, dreamed, and built a world worthy of remembrance. The volcano took their future, but in the end, it gave them something perhaps more precious, the chance to be known. And in that knowing, they ask us the most haunting question of all: when the earth shakes beneath our feet, what will we leave